Sideshow wishes you sweet dreams. Here's your relook at the Sideshow Collectibles A Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger 6-scale figure. The Freddy Krueger 6-scale figure is an amazingly accurate and detailed recreation of the monster's look from A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: The Dream Warriors. Beneath his trademark fedora is Krueger's burned, scowling visage and a fully detailed cloth costume, including his iconic weathered striped sweater. To offer collectors the opportunity to pose Freddy in unique ways, Sideshow included 2 different takes on the character's bladed glove hand, one open, one gesturing. The piece also includes 3 ungloved hands, open fist, and pointing. The Sideshow exclusive variation also includes an alternate pointing gloved hand. Just before we have a closer look at the Springwood Slasher, the first thing we're going to do is figure out how tall the Sideshow Collectibles, I'm waving it right now, the Sideshow Collectibles Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger. This was a re-review I've been requested to redo several times now, with one just recently sent out to me asking, could I have a look at the Sideshow version of Freddy again, and I'd be more than happy to oblige. There is some, of course, controversy dealing with this particular release. We'll talk more about that in a second. We don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. You're looking at the tape measure, I'm looking at the tape measure, I'm telling you that Sideshow's Freddy stands 11.8 inches in height, and that, in centimeters, works out to be 30.1, a little over 30 centimeters tall. Now, unlike the Sideshow Collectibles version of Jason Voorhees, which unfortunately at the time of doing a re-review of him, I didn't actually have his original display stand. It's not certainly the case when we're having a look at Freddy Krueger. You can see that he does come included with the same rather familiar hexagonal stand that comes included with all of Sideshow's pieces. Really, there's a few out there that don't come with stands like this, but 9 times out of 10, when you get a Sideshow 6-scale figure for yourself, you're usually treated to something looking like this. One thing that may not look like this with every single release, obviously, is the fact that they've got Nightmare on Elm Street done and printed on the surface of the plastic. It's something that it's barely easy to make out, actually. It's very difficult to see, especially if you've got your 6-scale figures displayed in a shelf that doesn't have the upper light, the light shining down on the figures. This, I think, would have worked much better, if you ask me, if they had done this just simply in red. Obviously, when I'm thinking of Nightmare on Elm Street as well, the coloring for the font is generally not black. I'm thinking more white, or I'm thinking more red. But it seems for them, at least, when it came decision time to produce the stands for themselves, they opted to just put the printing done in black. And like I said, it's fine that they did have it, but you can barely make out for the fact that it's there. It obviously helps that I got the studio light reflecting off the surface. But I mean, certainly sitting it down like this from a distance, if you look away from a distance, I can barely make out that there's actually even a font on the top of the stand. Feel like I spent too much time talking about the display stand. Let's change our focuses and focus our attention on the one floating hand that I'm currently holding in front of the view of Freddy Krueger. This happens to be, ladies and gentlemen, the exclusive that came included with the figure. Realizing quickly after I'd ordered Jason Voorhees that I passed on what I feel now is the much needed harpoon gun. I wasn't going to make that same mistake when it came to Freddy Krueger. So what you do get for an offering for Freddy is this right here. It's good. I mean, you do get a pointing gloved hand. As you can see, it's perfect for if you want Freddy pointing at somebody, if you want him scratching the side of his face, for example. But then if you look at the other gloves that he comes included with, just excuse me, I'll put this one down for a second. These are the 2 gloved hands that come included with the standard release, that, of course, not being the exclusive. If you look at them, one is just a relaxed hand with all the fingers fully extended. And then you have this one that has a slight wave effect, kind of when you look at it. If you look at this and you look at the exclusive glove, there really isn't that much different between them. Yes, these fingers are closer to the palm, but it really is only boiling down to the pointer finger being the big difference maker between the 2 gloves. It's nice, again, that they do throw this into the mix. But I think if you're going to be giving us an exclusive, a reason to direct the attention of the collector to getting this one, over the standard release, I think I would have preferred, say, the skeletal remains of Freddy Krueger from Part 3. Or maybe, for example, an alternate head portrait, which will play into something with the whole removing of the fedora. We'll talk about, obviously, about that in a second. The gloved hands, whatever poison you pick, these are the three, again, gloved hand options that you go with. Again, I don't really ever display my Freddy with this particular glove. I think usually 9 times out of 10 I usually go with this one. I just like the look and design of it. I mean, it's got a decent paint job to it. To the credit, they did put a lot of blood, very sprinkled generously across each of the individual blades. The paintwork done on the front is nice, with the brass plating. I do feel, though, that the copper could have been maybe a little bit of a different shade of color, because it does too much of a job of blending into the rest of the glove. That if this was just a slight, I don't even say a lighter shade, but certainly if it was a little bit more of a metallic copper, something again, just so it looks like it's a separate piece from the rest of his glove. Like the gloved hands again are nice touches. These again are the standard releases. Let's go ahead and grab the exclusive release. There it is right there. I mean, again, if you are in the market of getting extra gloves, the exclusive worked well for you in that department. But I think when it's all said and done, I think I would have wanted something else to catch my fancy for Freddy. An alternate head sculpt certainly would have been handy in a case like this. And while we leave Freddy still with no glove in his arm socket, we'll talk about the other things that come included with the figure. This pretty much makes up the rest of his accessories. He comes with a closed fist. Not super exciting there. He comes with an open hand, a relaxed hand that's currently in the socket of that Freddy. And then he also comes with a pointing hand. Obviously, you all know, fans of Freddy will know that the gloved hands are all going to be on this side, and the regular scarred hands will be on the right side of the screen. I mean, the pointing hand is a nice touch. That's also something that you could potentially go with for the figure. For me, I prefer really to go with the relaxed hand myself, but just a quick close-up look at the scarring done to the surface of the skin. Is it movie accurate? I mean, certainly would depend and dictate which movie you're looking at and how scrupulous you're actually looking at each of the individual scenes. Freezing it and holding this up to the camera. No, it doesn't look like it's quite as accurate as it was to the film. Maybe sticklers to detail would probably pinpoint the fact that this isn't the most accurate. I mean, I feel like the skin color is the one thing that lets this figure down. It goes for a real pale, kind of malnourished looking skin complexion. And it certainly starts here with the hands. The hands look good in scar, but I feel like for the paint, they're awfully grayish. The skin tone, that is. I mean, again, it's not bad in the way that they've detailed each of the individual fingers. And the fingernails as well are nice touches. I mean, I didn't realize Freddy, it looks like he's a nail biter. But yeah, it's really the coloring of the flesh. The coloring of the Freddy here that really lets the figure down. It really makes him look dead, and I know that states an obvious when it comes to Freddy, but I think the skin color is way too off for Freddy. Let's have a look at his head sculpt. So let's talk about Freddy's head sculpt, which is obviously the big talking point. One of the things that has led to the controversy of this particular figure, whether you have this physically in hand yourself, or through various reviews, you probably have seen people all stating the exact same thing. Not verbatim to what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it in the same way. Posing one question: why isn't the fedora removable? For one reason or another, Sideshow decided to either sculpt the fedora on top of his head, or they simply just glued it in place. The coloring certainly is one thing. I feel it's a little too dark. It should be a little bit more of a lighter chestnut brown. But I can overlook that if only that fedora was actually something that you could take right off. But you can't. Sculptors and certainly creative artists out there, like D. Knight, for example, did a whole video where he actually had removed the fedora. It broke the glue or adhesive that was in place. And then underneath all of this was an unfinished head, or at least the top forehead of Freddy, that then had to involve going back in, sculpting it from scratch. And he does have now a Freddy Krueger that has a removable fedora. If you get this guy defaulted out of the packaging and you don't have the skill set, for example, like D. Knight, you probably are going to now just keep Freddy on display, constantly looking at him like I look at him and think, not only am I disappointed being such a harsh word, but I'm disappointed that the fedora isn't removable. But even if it wasn't, if they had only just made it lower, it's way too high on the figure. It actually should be at least I feel it should be like right, not right above his eyebrow, but maybe like right to this point right here. This little, well, this little burn right here, right above this burn, is probably where I would have sat the fedora in place. Or simply just have it as a separate piece altogether. They could have easily just put a magnet there. They could have easily put a magnet in the top of his head, and bingo bango, you would have had a fedora that you could tip upside down, and it wouldn't be going anywhere. It's disappointing again, like why they chose to go this route. This is not the first time they've done this. With the Jason, for example, they had a non-removable hockey mask, which if you saw the review that I just recently posted of Jason, you could, in theory, pry the mask off. It would cause some damage to the top of his forehead, but there is actually a sculpted head sculpt underneath all of that. Why they went the same route with Freddy Krueger and not given us the option to have a removable fedora is beyond me. I mean, it doesn't look bad, the hat that is, and I guess for some bit of point as well, the head sculpt isn't terrible either. But it's really what lets this figure down is the head with the hat on top. It looks off place. And it definitely doesn't look like a character where Freddy would normally have had the hat this high up. It most definitely would have been sitting lower. And even further to that, it probably would have even been tilted down, just slightly covering and shadowing over Freddy's eyes. Okay, we'll talk enough about the hat. The head sculpt for Freddy is okay. I mean, it's certainly, comparing it to some of Sideshow's earlier releases of Freddy Krueger, this one has a better looking likeness to it. It's not 100% spot on, but I think it's close enough. The grimace mouth is something I wasn't too keen on initially. I think I still would have preferred a little bit more of a neutral head sculpt myself without the teeth fully visible. But still, I mean, they sculpted the teeth decently enough. It looks like a row of cobbed corn. That's corn you definitely would not want to be eating. I mean, it's got a nice discoloration to it. And as to that as well, Freddy's face sculpt is overall pretty decent with the way that they put all the scars in place. Even if it doesn't 100% look like Freddy Krueger from the films, it's close enough that you obviously know who it is when you're looking at it. The scars are really nicely done, though, again, going back to something I mentioned earlier, it's the skin pigmentation. Again, looking at one of the hands next to his face, it's very gray. No, not my feelings of Freddy, but the skin is very gray-based. The hands are the worst of the two. The face, though, definitely needs a little bit more warmth to it. I would have made a starker contrast with the scarring. So, for example, those burns, I would have made a little bit slightly darker red. And I would have made his skin a little bit slightly more orange. Not like a pumpkin orange, but I certainly would have made the skin tone just a slight drop of orange, warmer than what it is right now. I mean, we get, again, Freddy is burned and he's technically dead, but he doesn't have this grayish skin like certainly it looks like on this actual figure. Like I said, the head sculpt is close enough, but things like not having a removable fedora, certainly not having the hat low enough on the figure, and this grayish skin that's on the surface of the plastic are all things that really do detract away from overall liking the look of Freddy's head sculpt. One of the other concerns that a lot of collectors had with this particular release of Freddy Krueger is the choice of colors for Freddy's sweater. The material is close enough for a woven looking sweater, and I have no real complaints necessarily with the material that they used. Yes, I'm still missing the gloved hand, don't worry, I'll put that in place in a second. It's definitely not the material that bothers me as much. It's the coloring that they decide to stain the green across. I think one thing that they ended up doing wrong was that they printed it as a stain instead of actually doing like a two-tone, two-color stripe. They literally took the color of this fabric. If I flip it upside down, you can see how it works. Like, the material is pretty good, but then they banded a stain of green across it, and it barely reads as green. Certain light conditions, if I hold it slightly up to the light, maybe you can see it, it has a slight off green coloring to it, but it's very, very dark green. And I'm thinking what the biggest problem has happened from this is because they stained over top the coloring of the materialed sweater, I think it ended up translating more to a darker stripe. And actually, in person, it looks more green than perhaps it does in camera. In the camera, it looks more black. And certainly when you have it on display from a distance, it registers a little bit more like a dark, very dark green, or even again that borderline black. The sweater material isn't so much the issue, and I like the little tears that they put down along the bottom, along the cuffs of the sleeve, and even like the top section of his sweater where, of course, his neck fits through. You can see going on right there. But it's the coloring of the green that is off-putting. I mean, obviously there's been companies that have done sweaters for Freddy, maybe color-wise a little bit better. I mean, I think the material is a quality-looking sweater material, but it's the stripes itself done in green that really, again, lets this figure down. Sounds like I'm consistently saying the same thing, but again, there's a lot of things that are negatives to the figure. The head sculpt, for example, the coloring, I should say, of the head sculpt, the fedora. Yeah, I know, we talked all about that already. And now, of course, the coloring of the sweater. There's a lot of strikes you're checking off against this figure. I don't have so much the issue when it comes to Freddy's pants. Sticklers, of course, again going back to the source material, could say that the pants would be a little bit more of either black or brown. Certainly not maybe the root of gray. The pant material actually is decent enough, and the seam stitching that they added to it does look for a really nice finished pair of trousers. Even again, if it's not the most screen accurate in color, I don't really have too many issues with the trousers. Believe you me, there's enough going on with the figure that I could nitpick too. Trousers would be the least and the lowest on the list for me. Then we have Freddy's, of course, his boots, his trademark boots, with nice treading sculpted on the underside here. The boots are pretty good as well. You can see the lace has been done there in place. This particular figure, and it's not going to be everybody's obviously, but when I did get this guy out of the packaging the first time I reviewed him, and ever since, I've got this little bit of schmutz that's at the bottom of the pant leg. I don't know if it's glue or if it's a little bit of paint. I've just scraped it off. Not too much, spending too much concern on it, but I probably could just see if I could take a cloth and maybe wipe that off. I feel it's like just a little bit of glue or something. The pant legs I do feel like maybe the legs could be a little longer, not Freddy's legs necessarily, but the pant leg I feel could be a little bit longer. They sit a little too high in the boots. I feel like they probably just could be maybe right around here on at least Freddy's boots. The boots themselves for Freddy do feel like they're softer plastic. I mean, it's not that you can actually feel a foot inside of there, but hopefully me doing this can be some indicator. There's, like I said, a more softer plastic material that they used for his actual boots. The laces are done pretty good. The coloring of the boots I have no real problem with. I like the transition of color in the lighter brown that they got on the sole of the foot, or the front toe of the foot, and a more darker color the further you look back, further from here, of course, to here. The heel actually is about the same color as the front. It's the middle section here that's a slight different color to the two. Looking at Fred Krueger's articulation. His head rotates all the way around. It's got a nice ball joint working in its favor. You can see this has been an instance in which the head is actually a separate piece from the neck. The neck also, in addition, is a separate piece to the rest of his torso. And in case you guys are curious as to what it looks like underneath, Freddy has been working out. He's got a good 6-pack of abs underneath that. So they really didn't do any additional sculpting underneath that, nor are the hands the exact same. The hands pretty much stop at the wrist joint, and then further up from that is just a regular body. Didn't do that with Jason, and I like the fact that they went that a little extra mile and sculpted some additional sculpting for Jason's torso, at least for his arms at least. But as for Freddy, his head rotates all the way around. Being that this also is a separate piece, I mean, in theory, again, they could have included an alternate head portrait that didn't come included with the fedora as an option, maybe. But like I said, the head rotates all the way around. It hinges up and down, quite a bit actually, and back and forth. And then from there, he's also got a secondary ball joint that works at the base of the neck. You're probably not going to be moving and using that as often, but at least it's there that you can move the joint down, for example, on the neck. Kind of gives Freddy a little bit more of a lower look, and then from there you can kind of angle the head depending on which way you want it. And in doing it like this, you can kind of hide a little bit more the fact that his fedora sits so high. Yeah, I know we already talked about that. Upper torso is on a ball joint. It's really loose, unfortunately, on this particular figure. Actually, Freddy, for the little time that I've just displayed him with what little posing, I've done very little posing to this guy, his torso has become very, very loose. And his legs aren't so bad. His arms are a little on the loose side as well. But he's got a waist swivel. His arms hinge outward. So, again, if you want to have him posed, certainly in a way, not like, because he's from Nightmare 3, he's not from Nightmare 2, but If you are all his children, you can certainly pull off that look if you wanted to. His arm does move forward, it does move back, but he does also have the additional shoulder crunch. So if you really wanted to have the glove really far forward to the front of his torso, you can pull that off by the fact that he does have that. Swivel at the bicep, he's got a double hinge on the elbow, and you can rotate the hands, whatever hands you decide to go with, all the way around. That also works the same on this side too. So again, Freddy's got that double hinge on the elbow, and he also has that shoulder crunch, where you can move the shoulder much further forward. So if you wanted to have Freddy, for example, concealing and hiding his face, I suppose you could do that as well if you wanted to. For the figure's legs, his legs split out. That's as much as you're really going to be getting, because the seam gets awfully tight right in the middle there. He has a swivel on the top, cut at the thigh, double hinge on the knee. And then for Freddy's feet, they rotate all the way around, and they also hinge up and down. Just want to actually show you that the ball joint, the peg joint, is quite far rooted down at the bottom of his feet. So I would have actually thought it would have been up here, but instead they're quite a bit farther down, which one good thing working in its favor is the fact that the boots are less likely to fall off because the ball joint sits so far into the boot. Kind of keeps everything in place and prevents, again, it kind of also helps too to keep the feet from getting really progressively loose, because again, that ball joint sits not here, but a little bit further down. For the Sideshow Collectibles Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger, it was a figure I was really hoping to like. Having had pretty good experience in the past with picking up the 6-scale version of Jason Voorhees, yes, it's not the most screen-accurate Jason Voorhees. The mask is off versus Part 3, the way it's supposed to be based from, and the colors of his costume are also way off as well. But it was still a pretty good-looking Jason, one of which that I still enjoy looking at from time to time on my collection shelf. I felt like I was going to have this same experience with Freddy Krueger. Images surfaced of Freddy from Sideshow of what their figure was going to look like. Images like you're currently seeing on the back of the box, for example. That's not a bad looking Freddy, you probably said to yourself. I like the head sculpt. The fedora sits low enough on his head. The big problem with all of that, though, is that's photographer's trickery. The head sculpt is leaning towards you, so because of that, it looks like the fedora is lower on his head than what it actually is. The sweater actually has also a little bit more texturing to it than what we actually get here in physical. And even if you look at the collar on Freddy's sweater as well, it looks like it's a different material altogether. Unless maybe the image that they used on the back of the box is an earlier original figure that they were going to release and they changed it up at the last minute. But it definitely isn't the figure that we finally get in hand. I got this guy in packaging, was very excited to open up the box, put him on display, and the first thing I thought was probably the same thing that many of you guys who picked up this figure thought to yourself as well. That's odd, the fedora's a little higher on his head. Well, let me go ahead and fix that. Well, you realized quickly that the fedora can't be changed and moved on Freddy's head. The same way that Sideshow decided to put a permanent mask on Jason's face, neither of them can actually have things that remove on them. Which, if you go back to the earlier Sideshow releases of Jason Voorhees through the various different films and the Freddy Kruegers from the various different films, they have removable fedoras and they have removable hockey masks. Why have we done away with this with more what you would consider to be upgraded, newer releases of these characters? Freddy Krueger, at the very least, should have had a removable fedora. It could have had a magnet, or it didn't even really need to have a magnet, but being able to move it further down on his head, slightly more on an angle, the fact that you can't even pull that off is really disappointing. It takes what could be a pretty decent looking face for Freddy, and it really does detract a lot from it because you can't move the fedora further down the way it should be like it was in the film. The coloring on his skin is also slightly off-putting. It's way too pale and it's got a slight sickly grayish coloring to it. It definitely could be a lot warmer. The costume, surprisingly enough, is the thing that bothers me the least about the figure. Yes, the stripes could be a little bit more of a stark green versus what the green that we actually do get. The green actually comes across a little bit more of a brownish green. It's really weird the way it looks. Certain lighting, it looks more brown. Other lighting, it looks more black. The pants, for example, are gray. They probably could have been also a different color. But if I add up all the things that I don't like about this figure, the ones at the top of the list are the color of his skin and the fact that you can't move the fedora. Those are two things, simple things that I feel could have really vastly improved this figure. And for one reason or another, Sideshow just decided, again, I don't know why, Keep the fedora glued. How does that make any sense? Anyways, it's still only the Freddy, the most newest Freddy we can have to our collection. I suppose you can always go back and get the earlier releases of Freddy Krueger from Sideshow's earlier days. And while that doesn't have the most accurate, maybe the head sculpt's a little bit more primitive, to at least their credit, you can move the fedora, you can even take the fedora off. Why couldn't you do it with this Freddy? Sigh. Either way, guys, if you managed to pick up this one for yourself in the past, because, again, this is a second heaping helping of Freddy Krueger, let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of the figure, or based on this review and this review alone. There's definitely a lot of things that this figure needed to fix it. And unfortunately, until we get another release of Freddy in a 6-scale version, this is sadly the most updated version of Freddy that we can have in our collection. Unless you want to source out and get different various customizers out there that are creating brand new Freddy Kruegers from scratch. But that's going to be a big jump. This figure was around $200. Most customizers are selling 6-scale Freddys closer to be about the $2,000 price point. So you can have movie realism if you want, or you can also be someone like myself that just doesn't have the available funds to get those customized from scratch version Freddys. This is the best Freddy, unfortunately, that you're going to have in your collection. Today we were going back and re-reviewing, second glancing, if you will, of the Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger 6-scale figure from Sideshow Collectibles. Still a pretty disappointing looking figure. Freddy does deserve a lot better than this. If you guys are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and keep those peepers peeled, members of the mob, because there's going to be a whole lot of reviews coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.